to look at a verse in Acts 17 because I think this is kind of a place we need to start as we get into dig into some of this information in tonight's study. So Acts chapter 17, verse 11. So Paul and Silas are on one of their missionary trips, and so in verse 11 it says, I'll start with verse 10 just because it's kind of the beginning of a section here. That very night the believers sent Paul and Silas to Berea. When they arrived there, they went to the Jewish synagogue, and the people of Berea were more open-minded than those in Thessalonica. They listened eagerly to Paul's message. They searched the scriptures day after day to see if Paul and Silas were teaching the truth. And as a result, many Jews believed, as did many of the prominent Greek women and men. So what I want to propose to you is that you guys learn to be like the Bereans. So we're going to search the scriptures, and we're going to search for the truth. Now, I am starting like that because if you did the reading for this week, you know that it's full of all the symbols and all these things, and it could be interpreted in many different ways. As a matter of fact, there are so many different commentators and so many different ways that people interpret some of these scriptures that it can be a little bit overwhelming. So what I want to suggest to you is that you, because you have the Holy Spirit, and as you read God's word, that you can be discerning about what is truth and what is not truth. Now, what I will say is there's some very well-meaning people that come up with all sorts of different views on end times prophecy, which is what we're kind of looking at tonight. So there's all different types of views and very godly people in different schools and different thought process and everything. So it's not to say that any of those people specifically are wrong or right. What we have to understand is there's a lot of godly people on both sides of the camp. There are lots of different ways that people can interpret it, but what I think is that we have to be very careful to not go far out there in our interpretation, because the Bible does have some pretty straightforward interpretations that don't require us to go off into our imagination and try to figure out things that aren't actually there. So we're going to try to stick with a literal, as close as possible to a literal interpretation of this passage, and actually try to, I mean, it's exciting and we can look at some things, but there are some commentators that will go off, and I'll talk to you about that in a little bit. But I want to tell you that when you're studying prophecy, we need to let the Bible be the teacher as much as possible. Let the Holy Spirit guide us into all truth, and we need to be very diligent about seeking the truth. And don't allow ourselves to go down all kinds of roads that sound really good, but actually aren't fully backed up by the scripture. Does that make sense? So I just really thought that'd be a great place to start, because this chapter is quite, well, not just this chapter. From this point on, so wait till you read next week. It'll blow your mind. So it's like all of this stuff, this prophecy, these visions that Daniel is having, they kind of can take us all kinds of places. And as I study different commentators, I'm like, wow, okay, so this person says this and this person says this. How do you know the truth? And so that's why what I'm trying to do, what I want us to focus on as much as possible is let the Bible be the teacher, let the Bible teach itself. So where there's symbols that can be defined by the Bible, let's use the Bible to define those symbols. Instead of looking out into culture and saying, oh, well, it could be this or it could be that. Because we actually don't know. So we're just speculating about some of that, right? And it'll all make more sense as we get there. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn to Daniel chapter 7. And let's get to Daniel chapter 7. And so this is the deal. So Daniel is in Babylon. God has brought him to Babylon, brought him there as a 14-year-old young man. He was brought in there and trained to be a Babylonian wise man. During that time, God gave him the gift of interpreting dreams, and he actually was such a godly young man, such an exemplary young man, because the Babylonian leaders wouldn't care if he was godly or not, but he was exemplary. His spirit was different. He was exceptional. So God raised him up. God allowed him, and then to get to this place of prominence within the Babylonian culture. So he actually serves at a very high position under Nebuchadnezzar, who is the greatest of the Babylonian leaders, and then he serves under Belshazzar, who is a grandson to Nebuchadnezzar. And then at the end of the Babylonian culture, the Medes and the Persians take over, and he serves at a high position in those courts. So what's really cool about Daniel's story, if you haven't read it, is that Daniel was definitely, without a doubt, placed there by God. Sovereign will of God placed him in that place. And reading his story, because really and truly he was put there under duress in some ways. He was taken captive, he was kidnapped in a sense and placed into this culture that was completely different. But yet it's clear that God used him and had him there for a reason. So for us, the encouragement is, no matter where you are, no matter where you've been placed, God is sovereign enough to put you there. And you can trust him and recognize that maybe he has a plan for you. So you may not like your job, or you may not like your neighborhood, or you may not like something else in your life, some other position you're in. But you can say, you know what? But I'm serving a big God who is sovereign over all things. And so he has me here. So I'm going to trust him. So Daniel, in the Babylonian culture, is placed up underneath these rulers. Now, Belshazzar was not a good leader, or not a good ruler. Belshazzar was actually you can sit right back here, Daniel. Here's a place for you. Sorry. Belshazzar is this leader who comes as a grandson of Daniel, which is very interesting, but he's not anything like Nebuchadnezzar. I'm sorry, he's not a grandson of Daniel. Grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. He is nothing like Nebuchadnezzar, though. Maybe like Nebuchadnezzar was before. But Nebuchadnezzar, we believe, maybe came to faith in God after he saw all the things that God did through Daniel, and specifically God raised him up to basically made him a beast, and just sort of, that's in chapter 4 of Daniel, so read that if you want to get a crazy story. But anyway, all that being said, I'm just kind of giving you a quick background to Daniel, why Daniel is here. Now, so Nebuchadnezzar is no longer the ruler, Belshazzar is the ruler, and sometime during that time, so if we were looking at a chronology of the chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, we're all under Nebuchadnezzar, and then in chapter 5, Belshazzar is the leader. So this vision takes place before chapter 5 and after chapter 4. So this vision and then the next vision, which is next week, is also under Belshazzar, and it also takes place during that time. So if you're looking at a chronology, 1, 2, 3, 4, then 7 and 8, chapters 7 and 8, and then we go back to 5, 6. So it's kind of interesting how it goes out of order. So we don't know for sure why it was put that way, but what we believe is the second part, where we are now in 7 and up, is all prophecy, whereas before it was mainly history. So that's a quick review of a little bit of that, and those of you that may not have studied the first 6 chapters, you should do that at some point, because they're really exciting. And we actually have videos of those lessons from the beginning of the year. Let's just go ahead and read chapter 7. We're going to read through. I'm going to make a couple of points, and then we're going to get to the part that we're going to really hone in on tonight. So here we go. Verse 1. Earlier during the first year of King Belshazzar's reign in Babylon, Daniel had a dream and saw visions as he lay in his bed. He wrote down the dream, and this is what he saw. Now, I'm reading from the New Living Translation, by the way, tonight, which is one of the versions I enjoy reading from, especially when I'm reading difficult passages. It's just a little bit clearer sometimes, so that's what I'm reading from. It also is bigger font, and so I chose it's a little easier to read, and it's a beautiful turquoise color. No, this is the Bible I had in a drawer, and I just discovered it. I forgot I had it, so I brought it out, and I was like, I'm going to use this because I can see it better. Anyway, but I'm starting to write all in it, so it works out perfect. It's one of those journal Bibles. Anyway, so he saw visions. Now, verse 2, in my vision that night, I, Daniel, saw a great storm churning the surface of a great sea, with strong winds blowing from every direction. Then 4 huge beasts came up out of the water, each different from the others. So a couple of things that are established here is the sea represents humanity. So we're not talking about a sea, not real water, but in the Bible, when sea is represented or used, it's always referring to sea of humanity, groups of people. So then it says the beast. Well, what we know from Scripture is the beasts represent men. They aren't beasts in the sense of what we think of as, terrifying beasts. Even though they're described a little bit like that, they're actually representative of certain men, types of men or men. So the first beast was like, each of the beasts were different. So we have 4 beasts. The first beast was like a lion with eagle's wings. As I watched, its wings were pulled off, and it was left standing with its 2 hind feet on the ground like a human being, and it was given a human mind. That beast is representative of, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit, but it's actually representative of the Babylonian king, the Babylonian kingdom. So actually these beasts, in this particular description, is describing the kingdoms. And so Babylon actually was described or represented often by a lion. And then with the eagle's wings, that is actually all over Babylonian antiquity. If you go, there are places where you can find museums that have sculptures from the Babylonian era, and guess what? The lion with wings is represented there. So we know that it was a part of their culture that they believed that so anyway, that's what the first one represents. It also describes him being on his 2 hind feet like a human being. His wings were pulled off. Well, that represents the situation that happened to Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 4 of Daniel, when he actually puffed himself up and became very arrogant, and God made him like a beast. And he lived out in the fields, and then he was humbled, and then he became, after he was humbled by the Lord, he is put back on his feet, and he gets to be the ruler for the remainder of his life. Then I saw a second beast. This is verse 5. And it looked like a bear, and it was rearing up on one side, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And I heard a voice saying to it, "Get up, devour the flesh of many people." The bear represents the Medes and the Persians. This is basically a combined kingdom. The Persians kind of took the Medes in, and they became this huge kingdom. The Persians were a larger amount. They had a bigger army and a bigger group of people. So that is why the second beast is on one side. It's one-sided. One side is bigger than the other, representing the Persian side being bigger than the other. And then there were 3 ribs in his mouth, because there's 3 kingdoms that the Medes and the Persians really attacked, and one was, of course, Babylon, Libya, and Egypt. So the 3 main kingdoms that they destroyed in the process. They devoured them. A bear represents very brute force, and they were a very terrifying, sort of, formidable group of people. And we know that from history, not just from the Bible, from historical documents, that the Medes and the Persians, the Persian Empire, Alexander the Great, all of that he was horrendous in the way he conquered people. Now we have the third beast. The third of these strange beasts appeared, and it looked like a leopard. It had 4 birds' wings on its back, and it had 4 heads. Great authority was given to this beast. This represents the Greek kingdom, and I'm sorry, I totally messed up. Alexander the Great is the Greek kingdom. The Persian kingdom, Medes and the Persians, would be Cyrus and Darius. So I messed up on that. Alexander the Great is the Greek, and he basically even referred to this himself. So if you go back to historical documents, he looked at Daniel and he says, "I'm supposed to be the king, like over this." And he was representative of how swiftly he overtook all these other kingdoms. He moved swiftly. That's why the leopard sort of represents him. And then, and then he had 4 heads. So when he died, the kingdom was divided up into 4 different kingdoms, or 4 different rulers. Not so much kingdoms, but 4 rulers after Alexander the Great was conquered. Okay, so I got that straightened out. Alexander the Great is, so that's what we know about him. Okay, now we're going to go to the 5th. So then in my vision, verse 7, that night I saw a 4th beast, terrifying, dreadful, and very strong. It devoured and crushed its victims with huge iron teeth, trampled their remains beneath its feet. It was different from any of the other beasts, and it had 10 horns. As I was looking at the horns, suddenly another small horn appeared among them. 3 of the first horns were torn out by the roots to make room for it. This little horn had eyes like human eyes and a mouth that was boasting arrogantly. Now, this kingdom actually represents the Roman kingdom, but in this particular case, there's not a beast that's specifically put with it. So like we have the leopard and the bear and the lion, but in this one, there is no description. There's no human description for what this beast looks like. And most commentators say that is because the Roman kingdom, and this whole thing that we're about to get more explanation for in just a second, did not look like any other kingdom. So we will talk about it. So that's why there was no beast to put with it. There was nothing concrete to discuss with it. So now this whole layout here, I want to just draw your attention to this. This is the way all the visions, there's 3 visions in Daniel. Daniel 7, Daniel 8, and Daniel 10, I think, is where the 3 visions are, and they're all laid out the same. They give the vision first. Daniel sees the vision. He describes the vision. He doesn't give much commentary on that. He just describes what it looks like, and that's what we talked about last week. Just what does the vision look like? And I gave you some background information. Today, at the second part, is the interpretation of the vision. So that's how they're all going to be laid out like this. It's very same structure, which makes it kind of nice because it gives us some interpretation to that. So now we have this we have this one beast that was so different, terrifying, dreadful, strong, devoured, and precious victims. And then in verse 8, I was looking at it, and then it also has a horn. A small horn appears among them. 3 of the first horns were torn out by the roots to make room for it, and this little horn has eyes like human eyes and a mouth that was boasting arrogantly. And then we get to, I watched his thrones were put in place, and the Ancient One sat down to judge. His clothing was as white as snow, his hair like purest wool. He sat on a fiery throne with wheels of blazing fire, and a river of fire was pouring out, flowing from his presence. Millions of angels ministered to him. Many millions stood to attend him. Then the court began its session, and the books were opened. I continued to watch because I could hear the little horn's boastful speech. I kept watching until the 4th beast was killed and its body was destroyed by fire. The other 3 beasts had their authority taken from them, but they were allowed to live a little while longer. And then as my vision continued that night, I saw someone like a son of man coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient One and was led into his presence. He was given authority, honor, and sovereignty over all the nations of the world, so that people of every race and nation and language would obey him. His rule is eternal. It will never end. His kingdom will never be destroyed. And that's where we ended last week. Now, so what we have here, we're going to get more explanation from it. So I'm going to go ahead and just start our new section here, and we can refer back to that. But the only thing I want to call attention to is this. So this is Daniel seeing this vision. He's not just imagining this. This is actually a literal vision that God has given him, and he is laying out exactly what he saw. And he does see the ending of this vision, that beast, the beasts were all destroyed ultimately by, and especially the small horn. So the small horn we mentioned last week was the Antichrist, and we will talk about it more tonight. But at the end, this is a beautiful picture, and we could go to Revelation, and we can see that God is the Ancient of Days, described as in this way, and then the Son of Man is Christ, who is given dominion and able to rule over all those other kingdoms. This is a picture of the future, but at this point, Daniel doesn't really know what's going on. He's never seen anything like this, doesn't know it. He's just, laying out the dream he had. Now, for those of you that haven't read it, one of your things you're supposed to do this week was read chapter 2, or maybe you read that last week, but chapter 2 was Nebuchadnezzar had a vision. Nebuchadnezzar's vision was of a giant statue, and the statue had 4 different parts to it, and it had a gold head that represented Babylon, and it had a silver body that represented the Medes and the Persians, and then we have the bronze that represents the Greeks, and then the feet that were made out of iron and mixed with clay, and 10 toes, all those things. So how many of you read that already, chapter 2? Okay, so you should have that a little bit in your head. It was the vision that was given to Nebuchadnezzar, and what we believe is it looks so different than the vision that Daniel has, or not so different. There's some similarities, but the difference is the one that Nebuchadnezzar gets in chapter 2 is actually the human view of what's happening to the Gentile kings. Now, all of this is about the times of the Gentiles. This is about the ushering. So basically, when Israel was taken into captivity in Babylon, that began the times of the Gentile rulers. What it meant was there's no more Jewish rulers anymore. Remember, we had David, we had all these other kings, but they continued to disobey, not David so much, but all the other kings after him, all his grandsons and other kings after that, were very few really good kings that followed God. And so that was the end of it. The end of their reign in Jerusalem and all of Israel came to an end when Babylon took over. So there's never really another king of Israel after this that has any real power. This is called the times of the Gentiles. The end of the times of the Gentiles is at the second coming. So we are living right now in the time of the Gentiles. This is not, right now, this is not the time for the Jewish kings. There will be no more Jewish kings until the second coming. There'll be, and that Jewish king will be, I guess, Jesus. I mean, ultimately, there is no, so that's what we're talking about here, is the times of the Gentiles. Now, so just a lot of this is just a little bit of review, just to kind of catch some of you up and just to make sure that you're on the same page. Let's go to what happens next. Because if you're Daniel, and you're sitting there going, I mean, like, how many of you have had, we talked about dreams before, because I am a dreamer. I dream the craziest dreams. I mean, literally, I should write a book. And I'm wondering if people who write these crazy sci-fi movies are people like me that have dreams like mine, because they're so weird. And I'm just waking up going, what in the world? Where did that come from? Well, if I was Daniel and I woke up after a dream like that, I'm sure I would be going, what in the world is that? What did I just see? And his next one is even crazier, if you ask me, in chapter 8. So there are so many just interesting things about it. So Daniel he's had this dream. He needs somebody to help him. He needs some help. So in verse 15, he says, Daniel was troubled by all he had seen. And he says, I, Daniel, was troubled by all I had seen, and my visions terrified me. Now, the actual Greek word here is, he was distressed. It's actually a word, behar, or bihar, it's probably pronounced behar. But it basically is this concept that he was very, very distressed to the point of it pierced his soul. He just did not understand this vision that he had seen. It was just very piercing. And so it was disturbed, is another way you could say it, disturbed, troubled, frightened even. So it was quite something that shocked him. Now, so I've talked about having dreams, but what about nightmares? Because in a way, this is a little bit like a nightmare almost that he had, but it's not, but there's still some good in it. So he's probably very confused. And I don't know if I told this story in here, but I had a dream a couple of years ago. This is really true. I really had this dream, and it was it was scary, and then it's really kind of eerie now, but this is the deal. It was it was in 2019. Okay, so it's at the end of 2019. So put that into, and I had this dream that I was in this room, kind of like, I feel like it was at the hangar at the Highway 154 campus. It was in this set, and I was walking around with people, and there were a lot of people like maybe just church people in there with me, and we were walking around, and I started having conversations with people. And all these people started telling me they were moving. They were moving to the north. And I was like, wow, that's really weird. And so they all started talking about they were moving to the north, but I was like, I can't move. Ken's the pastor. I can't leave. All these people are moving. And then there was this real, like, I can't even describe it, but it was almost felt like I don't even know how to describe it, but it felt like a shift in the world, like something had changed. It was like this whole, like, I could almost feel like the world shifted. I don't know how to describe it. And that's what was instigating all these people moving. So they were moving because there had been this shift in the world. And I woke up, but the conversation was interesting because there were a lot of really, really young people that weren't leaving. Just people more my age were leaving. And I was like, that's weird, but I'm going to stay down here anyway. But it was this shift. I think it was because a lot of people started moving to the lake and stuff, and it was in my head or something. I don't know what it was. But the point was, it was very, very real, this whole shift in the world. And then we've got like maybe 8 months later, and then COVID comes. And I seriously was like, because that's how it felt. Something so it was scary in a way in my dream. I was like, what is this dream about? I don't understand. What is this shift in the world that everybody was like, knew it was going to happen? Or everybody was everybody was reacting to this shift. And it was just like, I can't remember all the details, only that it was a shift. But my point was, I was a little terrified. I was like, I don't understand this. It was just very strange. And I just woke up with this weird feeling, and I can still remember it. Now, what would have been really nice is if there had been an angel in my dream. And I could have said to that angel, can you just give me an interpretation of this dream? It would have been so much better, because honestly, that dream probably meant nothing. Probably just meant some crazy thing that I had seen on TV or read something. It probably didn't mean anything, and I'm reading into the whole thing. But if I had a dream and there was an angel there and I could ask them, then maybe it would be a legitimate dream, which is what happened to Daniel here. So Daniel, he was troubled, and then he looks over, so I approached one of those standing beside the throne and asked him what it all meant. And he explained it to me like this. So one of those, nobody doubts, there's no real commentators that will deny that this was probably an angel. Some sort of angelic being was there that he went to and said something to. Can you tell me what this means? Now, if you have read Revelation, you know this is very similar to what happens with John. When he sees the revelation, he sees the vision, and angels are there sometimes to give him some interpretation. So, well, actually, the Lord is kind of speaking to him, but there are angels that speak in the dream. And so this is kind of a similar kind of feeling. So he goes to him and he asks for some kind of interpretation. Now, one thing that's really great about the way this whole thing is structured is we don't have to figure out a whole lot, because it's actually interpreted for us. So as I started out the meeting talking about the fact that we want to be really careful when we go off on some of these tangents on how we want to interpret some of these things, the nice thing about Daniel is it actually gives us some of that interpretation. It actually spells it out for us. We just have to follow it as it is written in somewhat of a literal translation. Now he asked, and in my version I just read, it just said to tell me what it means. But what he was really asking is for an interpretation. And the word pishar is an Aramaic word, and it describes the act of expounding or unfolding something that is not obvious. So the interpretation, the idea was, can you tell me, he asked the angel, can you interpret for me something that is not obvious? I want to know what is going on here. I don't understand this. So he asked for that interpretation. And so this is the deal. When we think about interpretation of this book, we're going to get a lot of we're going to encounter a lot of variation between interpretations. One of the reasons I told you to avoid looking at too many commentaries is because you're going to get so many different varied views. And the problem is we're all human. So even some of the ones that we know, this is a good commentary, they might also have something kind of strange that they throw out there or whatever. But I want to tell you, just take a minute and tell you a little bit about the interpretations of the book of Daniel. I want you to understand where some of these schools line up, because I think that's really important. So first of all, there are basically two schools of interpretation when it comes to the interpretation of prophecy in the book of Daniel specifically. First, we have the interpretation of what we call the higher critics, and then we have the school of the conservatives. So the higher critics, and this is really important for you to know, will teach that the book of Daniel was actually not really written in the 6th century, 6 BC, which is what we believe. That's a conservative view. That's what I believe. I'm going to follow a conservative viewpoint on this always. I'm not going to teach a liberal, kind of higher critic view at all, but I want you to know that there is a group of people out there that will teach, and you'll get this in a lot of colleges. If you go to a college, if your child goes to a public college and they go take an Old Testament class, good luck. They go to a Christian school and they take an Old Testament class, good luck sometimes. Because there's a lot of liberal teachers that are teaching in these colleges, and they will literally interpret it with the high critic view. And the high critic view says that Daniel was written later, like in the 2nd century AD, after everything had already happened, and so then it was written later. So they claim that the book of Daniel is not a book that we can trust. But the reason why we know that is a big fat lie, and they're way off track on that, is because Jesus refers to the book of Daniel in the 1st century AD. So it does not fit to say that this book was written later. So there's just a lot of weird interpretations with that. And so they would say, actually no, they say it was written in the 2nd century BC, but that's okay. The point is Jesus refers to it, the book of Daniel, and refers to it as a book of prophecy that can be trusted. So because Jesus said it was, that's why we believe it, for sure. So the high critics, we throw them out, we don't pay any attention to them. But I'll explain to you some of the things that they sometimes say that as we go along. So they say that the four empires that's spoken of in chapter 2 and 7 are reference to the Babylonian, the Median, the Persian, and the Grecian. So they take the four Medes and the Persians, they divide it up, and those are the four. And they're done. So when they wrote this in the 2nd century AD, the Romans hadn't even come on the scene yet. So they say that it was all history. Does that make sense? So they're claiming that. That's the high critic view. We won't take that view. The second view is what we call the conservative school. And this is where I really want you to pay attention. There are 2 sub-schools in the conservative school. Now, some of you may think, well, this is like too much, but no, it's really interesting for you to know this. There's 2 sub-schools. One of the sub-schools is what we call the amillennialist or the postmillennialist. That's one sub-school, and the other one is the premillennialist. Okay? The scholars of the sub-school of amillennialists or amillennialists and postmillennialists teach that the destruction of the 4th Gentile world empire, the Roman Empire, has been a gradual destruction of the church throughout all the ages. Okay, so they're claiming that has actually been happening. That's what the amillennialists. The reason why they say that is because they do not believe in a literal 1,000-year reign. They're amillennialists. They don't believe that. And so they're going to say it's a gradual destruction accomplished by the church. And then the scholars at the sub-school of the premillennialists, I know you're not going to remember all this, but it's okay, it's just interesting to know. They teach that the 4th Gentile world empire is to be a sudden, cataclysmic destruction accomplished by Christ at his second advent. And I take that role. I take that belief, and I think that is the most accurate belief based on lots of different readings. Now, like I said, I want you to know that's like, we're talking about sub-schools, and there's probably a sub-school of a sub-school. There's so many different views, but let's keep it simple. We're going to say that this 4th Gentile kingdom, the world empire that's spoken of here, is going to be, began with the Roman Empire, but this sudden cataclysmic destruction of it will be accomplished by the second coming of Christ. That's what we believe. Whereas they would have said with the amillennials that it was a gradual destruction of the 4th kingdom. Okay, how many of y'all are lost? You okay? Okay, hang in there. Okay. Okay, so I want to give you that little background there because I think it's pretty interesting here. One thing that won't help you, I'll give you one statement to just help you so you won't leave and not ever come back because you're so lost. Okay, don't do that. This is the thing about biblical revelation. It does follow consistent patterns. So if you are careful, like a Berean, and you study and you search the scriptures, you will come to an understanding of it. It may not be the first time you read it. It may take you a few times to kind of connect the dots and start making sense of it. But it can be done, and it should be done. Do not give up and say, that is too hard for me to understand. It is not too hard for you to understand. It's important for us to understand because not only does it help us be, understanding God's word and have a deeper knowledge, but it also gives us so much hope, so much excitement about the future. Now, there's some parts that are a little scary, but ultimately not really, because what do we just find out? The Son of Man is going to destroy all of that. He was given authority, honor, and sovereign over all the world, and his kingdom will never end. That's the one we serve. That's the God we serve, and so that's the good news that we live by. But knowing some of this stuff is really, really important to know. So don't get discouraged and don't get worried because things will start clicking a little bit more as we go along as you start figuring out some of these symbols. Okay, verse 17. So we're going to pick up here. So he said, these 4 huge beasts represent 4 kingdoms that will arise from the earth. But in the end, the holy people of the Most High will be given the kingdom and they will rule forever and ever. So right there, he gives them some hope again. He throws that nugget in there. He says, okay, so this is a 4th kingdom that's going to rise up. And it's going to be a bad kingdom. But in the end, the Holy One, holy people of the Most High is referring to God, will be given the kingdom, and they will rule forever and ever. So don't, even though he's giving him some kind of like dark, sort of scary visions in a sense, or under interpretation, he's also reminding him that this kingdom will be forever and ever. So I wanted to know, so then he said, then I wanted to know the true meaning of the fourth beast, the one that was so different from the others and so terrifying. It had devoured and crushed its victims with iron teeth and bronze claws, trampling their remains beneath its feet. Also asked about the 10 horns on the fourth beast's head and the little horn that came up afterward and destroyed 3 of the other horns. This horn had seemed greater than the others, and it had human eyes and a mouth that was boasting arrogantly. Okay, so he is, and when it says the holy people of the Most High, in some verses it says saints, right? So we do know that saints, and this is an important word for you to know, the word saint refers to all believers. Anyone who is a believer, but it also refers to Old Testament, in the Old Testament as well, to the Jewish people they were also referred to as saints at times too. So we know that the word saint here is referring most likely to New Testament believers, but we don't want to say that it doesn't also refer to the Jewish people who are going to get their chance in the end. So as you read on into Revelations, you find out the Jewish people will come back. Many of them will come to believe and accept in Jesus. That's a huge part of the end times, is the Jewish people coming back to God. So the saints are the ones who are believers. So we're gonna, anytime somebody calls you a saint, say thank you, I am. Because even though we feel weird saying that, we really are saints. It doesn't mean we act saintly all the time, but we are saints. So it's a little different. Okay, so he's really interested in the fourth beast. This fourth beast has got him confused because the fourth beast is so different. The fourth beast doesn't look like anything, can't describe it. So he's really, really asking for an interpretation of the fourth beast and this other horn. That has got him kind of thrown off. So let's talk a little bit about what, so then he goes on, and then, so he asks for all that, he tells him all about that, and he also says, as I watched this horn, I'm back to verse 21, as I watched, this horn was waging war against God's holy people and was defeating them, until the Ancient One, the Most High, this is God again, came and judged in favor of his holy people, the saints, and then the time arrived for the holy people to take over the kingdom. Another reference to reigning with Christ. The saints are going to reign with him. So this is 3 or 4 different times in here. Reminded they are going to reign with Christ. They're going to have, the Holy One is going to take over. He is going to have victory over this beast. But then he said, so now he describes it. Now he's going to explain the fourth beast. So let's look at verse 23. So the angel's going to help him get an understanding of this. The fourth beast is the fourth world power that will rule the earth. It will be different from all the others. It will devour the whole world, trampling and crushing everything in its path. Its 10 horns are 10 kings who will rule that empire. Then another king will arise, different from the other 10, who will subdue 3 of them. He will defy the Most High and oppress the holy people, the saints of the Most High. He will try to change their sacred festivals and laws, and they will be placed under his control for a time, times, and half a time. Okay, so let's dig down into this, because this is where it gets really interesting and crazy. Okay, so first of all, what we know here in this verse, I want to look at verse 22 for a second before I look at this. It said, all this is going to happen, this horn was waging war against God's holy people. So whatever this horn is, he's against God's holy people, against the saints, right? And then it says he was defeating them even until. The word until is a signal word that tells us a time has changed, a shift you might call it. Something has just happened until the Ancient of Days. So we know for a short time this little horn, which I've already made reference to, refers to the Antichrist, is going to have a little bit of power over the saints. He is going to have some power, some negative influence, some oppression, all of that. We all have heard that a little bit, but it's described here as well. Until the Most High came and judged. So God is the ultimate judge, and he will judge this Antichrist, as he will judge all evil men. Everybody is going to be under the judgment of a holy God. At some point, no evil is going to go unpunished. God will get the last word, and he will judge. And that is one of the things that we learn about in Revelation a little bit. So, until, and this until is actually a reference to, so when God comes, this is the second coming. So we say, until the Ancient of Days. That's describing the second coming. Now, let me just keep going here. So, here we got, so he talks about these, what is this kingdom? So, this kingdom is going to be different. It's coming, and what we know is it's the Roman Empire. However, and I brought this up before, but I'm going to kind of explain it again. The Roman Empire, when it came upon the scene, you know, it was ruled by, they had Caesars that were in control, they had dictatorships, but they actually developed a system called a republic. And the republic is actually where we get our democracy. So we actually model our government after ancient Rome, if you can believe that. So actually, the Roman Empire has never actually come to an end. It is the fourth kingdom. We are living in the fourth kingdom right now. We are though, what does it describe the fourth kingdom as? It's broken into different pieces. It's very fragmented. It's not like other kingdoms. It's not all connected together. It's got lots of back and forth. It's a pattern of breaking and combining, and the whole thing is back and forth, back and forth. It's very fragile. It does not hold up to a certain standard. You can kind of read that. Think about some of the things that happen in Europe, like Brexit, for instance. If you know anything about that, it was there, then it's not. It's like this whole, there's a lot of unrest all throughout Europe and really throughout all the world. But when the Roman Empire came on the scene, it never completely ever left us. That's the whole point. So we're in the fourth kingdom. And that is something to kind of keep in mind here. Now, and it also, so then what happens is we have this fourth kingdom, but we also know there will be a fifth kingdom that will come, and that fifth kingdom will be Christ, who comes and crushes the second coming. When he comes, it'll be the final kingdom, and it will be when he crushes all the other kingdoms. So that is for sure. Now, so he says this world power will rule the earth. It will be different from all those that devour the world. And then the other king will arise different from the other 10. So let's talk about the 10 kings for just a minute. It's very, very important that you understand this. So, remember the different schools of interpretation. So there are schools of interpretation that try to tell you who the 10 kings are, okay? They try to say who the 10 kings are, but this is the deal. The 10 kings, in the way it is written, they're all kings at the same time. This is not 10 kings in succession. There are 10 kings that are going to be all ruling at the same time. That has not happened yet. We cannot look at 10 rulers that have been all in kind of an equal sort of control up until now. So history does not give us that. So we can go back and look at all of history, and there's no place. So like the amillennialists will try to go back and say that it happened during the Roman Empire, that they they looked at 10 Caesars, but there's actually 12 Caesars. They try to tell you that 12 is really 10 and all this kind of stuff. What is very interesting is if you take one of those kinds of views where you're trying to figure out who the kingdoms are and you go and try to name them, you're actually doing a lot of gymnastics when it comes to the scriptures. You're like, well, I could make this happen. I think this could happen. I could see how this could be Russia. This could be Russia and Ukraine and Germany and blah, blah, blah. You know, you start going down those roads. But there is nothing that is substantiating that. That's where the imagination can kind of go out there. What we know is there will be 10 kings that will all rule at the same time. Those 10 kings will be in rule, and this will be getting closer to the second coming. So guess what? Second coming is not going to be tomorrow because we don't have 10 kings going on right now. We do not have 10 kings that we can look at that are clearly in control, in power. Now, will that happen? Yes, I believe it will. When? I don't know. Maybe in the near future. We may see that. We may see some combining of countries. We may see some people come together and there would be 10 kings. That could very well happen, and it could be very well happen in our lifetimes. I'm not saying it's not going to happen. That is getting us to the second coming. The next thing that's going to happen is there will be another kingdom that will arise out of those, that will be like the 11th kingdom. And this is where So it will devour the whole kingdom. Another king will arise different from the other 10, who will subdue 3 of them. So what does that mean? He will subdue 3 of them. Well, we don't really know. So we're speculating here. But maybe what happens is 3 of them will defy him as a ruler, and so he'll get rid of them because they won't be on his side. So what will happen is potentially this one king will control this 11th king will come and take over, and 7 of those kings will go along with him. The other 3 would try to devour him, and he gets rid of them. And that 11th king is the Antichrist. And that is who will definitely what he represents here. So we have this 11 kings. So the reason we notice it will devour then it says it's 10 horns, 10 kings. Back to verse 25. Another king will rise. He will defy the Most High and oppress the holy people of the Most High. He will try to change their sacred festivals and laws, and they will be placed under his control. So let's talk about what does that look like. So, what I've read here about some of this stuff is it's called the 10 king stage of Rome. It just hasn't happened yet. So don't try to believe that it's already happened, and don't try to figure out how it's going to happen. It is going to be more clear than you think when it happens. And we just don't know when, but it could be soon. And now, so we get to that 10 king stage, and one of the things, so one of the things I read was like in the ESV, so some of you may have some study Bibles that are great study Bibles. But that's where I want to say to you, they may not always give you the best interpretation, because in a really good study Bible, this was listed claiming that it was Julius Caesar to Domitian, and it talked about it being those Caesars, and it did that whole thing. It was in one of those little study Bible commentaries at the bottom. So you don't want to get caught up in just reading that one commentary and believing what it has to say is true. That's just an example of one of the ones that could be off track. Okay, so let me just get back to this here. So, the 10 horns, okay, so this 10 horns that are described here in, so let me go back to this. The 4th beast, you will define, but then the court, 4th beast is 4th world power. I gotta find my verse here. He'll try to change the sacred festivals. Let's go to that one here, that part there. So what does that mean, to change their sacred festivals? Change their time. So what we believe will happen when this 11th kingdom rises up, takes over, gets rid of 3 of the kingdoms, and the other 7 are under his power, so he's sovereign over those. He will try to change things. So think about, and what this is describing, guys, is the time of the tribulation. Okay, so let me just go ahead and speak it out here. Time, times, and time, and that whole phrase there, time, times, and half a time is referring to the 3.5-year reign of the Antichrist, is what we're talking about here. So time represents 1, times represents 2, and a half a time represents 0.5, so we have 3.5 or 3.5 years of reign of this Antichrist. So we're not there yet. Now, if you take the premillennial version of the pre-trib version, we will not be here. The church will be raptured, and there's many people that take that belief, and I like to hope that that's what happens. I'm not 100% convinced. We may have to go through the tribulation. I'm not 100% convinced of that. But I do believe in a millennial reign. I just don't believe, I'm not sure, 100% sure that we're going to get raptured, but don't write me any emails on that, because yes, I have read the Left Behind series. I mean, I know that, I know what it says, but there's also a lot more to it that we could talk about. But this is the point. The tribulation is going to happen. It's not going to happen until after 10 kings are all ruling at the same time. The one king rises up, the Antichrist. He is going to take over all the other kingdoms, and he will rule, and he will begin to oppress the saints of God. We know that's going to happen. Or he's going to oppress the people. He is going to, that whole, everything you talked about, we can go down that in Revelation 666, all that. We will talk about that more in a latter part, because we're going to come back to it in another chapter, so we're not going to get into all that right now in Daniel. But he is going to do all that stuff. He's going to oppress. So things like changing the calendar, potentially. So it may change the calendar. The calendar is all built around Christ, but this new ruler may try to change the times of the calendar, saying that no longer is it going to be following this schedule. There was actually, I didn't even know this, but there was a time when during somebody's rule, during the French Revolution, they tried to change 7-day week to a 10-day week. Yeah, and it didn't work. So it's not going to work. Everything that this Antichrist is going to try is actually not going to work, but he is going to try. So yeah, a 10-day week would be horrible. I'd go with a 4-day week, but not a 7-day, not 10-day. He will oppress the holy people. He will try. Now that's a real important word there. He will try to change their sacred festivals and laws, and they will be placed under his control for a time, times, and half a time. So 3.5 years. It's not very long. It's actually a very short time in the big scheme of things that they would be under control. But he's not going to really be able to accomplish the goal of changing anything, right? He's going to try. He's try to change the calendar, try to change the moral code, try to make these people not follow. This is where it gets a little sketchy to me, because what'd you say? Oh, this is where I wonder a little bit, I'm just going to say it out loud, about the rapture of the church, because what it says here is that he will defy the Most High and oppress the holy people. So that means there's holy people still here during the tribulation. So is that the people that get saved after the tribulation? Yes. That's what's But there's other people who would say, well, no, so we may go through the tribulation. So, hey, I don't know. I know everybody's going to go, wait, she doesn't believe in the tribulation. Anyway, it's not, I just have to say that there's biblical proof on both sides. That's all I'll say. So anyway, during that time, he'll place under control, and that 3.5 years is kind of a key point. But then. So we have that but then word just like we had before, until. Now this is another time. It's a signal word that changes time. But then, after 3.5 years, the court will pass judgment. The court is ruled by who? God. God is on the throne. He is the judge, and he will rule. And so the court will pass judgment, and all his power will be taken away. This is that 11th king. And he will be completely destroyed. Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of all the kingdoms under heaven will be given to the holy people, the saints of the Most High. His kingdom will last forever, and all rulers will serve and obey him. That is Jesus. And that is us as his children, as his saints, whether we've been raptured and we come back and rule with him, or whether we just make it through the tribulation and we rule with him. Whichever way, we're going to be with him in that millennial reign. And then that is the end of the vision. So that's where he stops there. So he stops in a very positive place. The angel tells him this is what's going to happen. But for a time, for 3.5 years, there's going to be oppression. Now, this is the deal. If we had a lot of time, we would dig in a little bit more into Revelation. So in the book of Revelation, so let's go ahead and take a little bit of time and go to a couple of verses, a couple places there in Revelation. Go to Revelation chapter 12. And we're going to just look at some connections here, because what you're going to find that's so interesting is how Revelation lines up so much with Daniel. And I think I told you at the very beginning, but in case you missed this somewhere, Daniel is the decoder ring for Revelation. Okay, so if you can read Daniel and understand some of this stuff, you can decode Revelation. The people in John's day that would have heard Revelation were not as freaked out about it as we were. They weren't confused because they knew Daniel. They knew the symbols that were already put out. They had already heard about this little horn, about this other kingdom. They knew about all of that. So that did not surprise them because they already understood it. So it was the decoder ring for understanding Revelation. So Revelation chapter 12, let's look at starting verse 14, I believe, is where we're going to start. We're going to look at a few passages here. Yes. Revelation chapter 12. We're going to look at several different places in Revelation. We'll start with chapter 12 here just to look at some connections here. Revelations 12, but she was, when the dragon realized that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child, but she was given 2 wings like those of a great eagle, so she could fly to the place prepared for her in the wilderness. There she would be cared for and protected from the dragon for a time, times, and half a time. Okay, so I wanted you to see that that is there. So for 3.5 years, this woman is protected here. Okay. Then it goes on. Then we're going to look at Daniel chapter. So I've got several verses here I want to look at. Revelation 11. We're not going back to Daniel. I'm sorry. I mean Revelations. 11:2. But do not measure. So this is just another little verse. I'm just showing you a couple things here. Then I was given a measuring stick, and I was told, go and measure the temple of God and the altar and count the number of worshipers. But do not measure the outer courtyard, for it has been turned over to the nations. They will trample the holy city for 42 months. And I will give power to my 2 witnesses, and they will be clothed in burlap and will prophesy during those 1,260 days. Anybody do math really fast in your head? How long is that? Those are 3.5 years. Time, times, and half a time. Okay, so all the same. All of those time periods are exactly 3.5 years. We, did the math here. So all that being said, we know there's the connection from basically Daniel being the decoder to here in Revelation when it comes up again. Now, let's look at Revelations chapter 13. Flip to that for just a second. And this one is really quite profound. I saw a beast rising above the sea of humanity. It had 7 heads and 10 horns, with 10 crowns on his horns. Okay, so 10 heads, 10 crowns, 10 kings, 10 leaders. Okay, and written on each head were names that blasphemed God. So this beast looked like a leopard, but it had feet of a bear and the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave the beast his own power and throne and gave authority. I saw that one of the heads of the beast seemed wounded beyond recovery, but the fatal wound was healed. The whole world marveled at this miracle and gave allegiance to the beast. They worshiped the dragon for giving the beast such power, and they also worshiped the beast, who is as great as the beast. Who is as great as the beast, they exclaimed, who is able to fight against him. Then the beast was allowed to speak great blasphemies against God, and he was given authority to do whatever he wanted for 42 months. Do the math. And he spoke terrible words of blasphemy against God, slandering the name in his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven, the saints. And the beast was allowed to wage war against, I just read that. And he was given authority to rule over every tribe and people and language and nation, and all the people who belong to this world worshipped the beast. Now, the people who belong to the world, not the people that belong to God. So the saints didn't worship him, only those who belonged to God. People that didn't belong to God were the ones that worshiped him. They are the ones whose names were not written in the book of life that belongs to the Lamb who was slaughtered before the world was made. And so then it goes down. I'm just going to skip down to, this means that God's holy people must endure persecution patiently and remain faithful. Now that's where I go, are you sure we're going to be raptured? Don't know. But God's people have to endure. So clearly, we could keep reading this. It talks all about, it's so much like the book of Daniel. So much like what goes on in chapter 7 of Daniel, and even back to, well, not chapter 2, but chapter 7 of Daniel. So this whole Antichrist that's brought up here is described in other places in there as well. Let's look at one more place here in Revelation. And there's a ton of them. Connections here, but I'm going to look at Revelation. Let's don't look at the whole. There's a bunch of things about the tribulation that are in other chapters of the other books of the Bible. So in 2 Thessalonians, it talks a lot about the tribulation, and we have some more explanation there. But let's kind of wrap it up here at this end part here. I want to go to the book of, flip over to 2 Peter here for just a minute. Let's go to 2 Peter 1:19. We're going to look at a couple of verses here. 2 Peter 1:19. so 2 Peter 1:19, because of this experience, we have even greater confidence in the message proclaimed by the prophets. What was Daniel? Prophet. You must pay close attention to what they wrote, for their words are like a lamp shining in a dark place until the day dawns and Christ, the morning star, shines in your heart. This is reference to the second coming. And actually just kind of this whole idea of we need to pay attention to what the prophets said. They gave as a warning. So this is in 2 Peter before Revelation was actually written down. Then if you look in 2 Timothy 2:12, I do want to maybe just kind of end with this idea here. 2 Timothy 2:12. And 2 Timothy 2:12 says, this is a trustworthy statement. I'm starting verse 11. If we die with him, we will also live with him. If we endure hardship, we will reign with him. If we deny him, he will deny us. If we are unfaithful, he remains faithful, for he cannot deny who he is. You know, this scripture here, verse 12. If we endure hardship, we will reign with him. It's a promise that we will reign with Christ. That it is something that we as Christians can definitely put our faith in and put our trust in. And honestly, a lot of this prophecy is something we have to put faith in, right? We don't know, we can't see what's going to happen in the future, but this is what we have. So let me just kind of wrap this whole thing up. What we have is some things they've already happened. The prophecy was that it would be, we would have the Babylonians, and they would be controlled, and then we would have the Medes and the Persians, and then we would have the Greeks. That has already happened. That exact thing happened. It started with the Babylonians, and the Babylonians were overtaken by the Medes and the Persians. The Medes and the Persians were overtaken by the Greeks, and then the Romans were next. All of those things have already come to pass. So it gives us confidence because it's a prophecy that's already been fulfilled. Because you have that to base on, and there's so many more passages like this, because you have that to base things on, then you can believe by faith that these other prophecies are going to come to pass. These other things that are talked about. We don't have to sit there and wonder, well, is this really going to happen? If God said it was going to happen, it did before, it's going to happen again. I actually did want to read a passage from Jeremiah. So let me find that. I want to wrap up with that because that's actually pretty cool here. In Jeremiah, so in the Old Testament, I mentioned that Daniel's a key. It's a decoder for Revelation, but so is Jeremiah and Ezekiel. So they both have a lot of things, lots of symbols, and lots of other things that are suggested in there that will help us in our understanding of this. So let's look at Jeremiah and, I already have it marked. Hey, I marked it in my Bible. That's what I did ahead of time. So let me find it here. Or actually, no, I did have it marked. Thing got messed up here. It's Jeremiah chapter, I'm sorry guys, I have a pile of notes here, so I have to go back to it. 23. Go to Jeremiah 23. Jeremiah 23, and we're going to start here. For the time is coming. So Jeremiah is talking to the people. They know they're about to be taken into captivity. He's told them, your time's up. You're about to be taken into captivity. They get taken to Babylon. He's preparing them, basically saying, your time is up. You've been given so many chances, and he's letting them know that it's about to happen. And here, but he does give them some hope, and this is from God through the mouth of Jeremiah. He says, for the time is coming, says the Lord, when I will raise up a righteous descendant from King David's line. He will be a king who rules with wisdom. He will do what is just and right throughout the land, and this will be his name. The Lord is our righteousness. In that day, Judah will be saved, and Israel will live in safety. So this was God prophesying about Jesus coming and about the fact that one day the Lord is our righteousness, that he would be coming back and he would reign. And so, really in several different places in Jeremiah, he actually refers to this future time when the Israelites God will restore them. So what we know is at the very last, as we get closer to the second coming, as we get closer to the end of times, We're going to be looking for 10 kings. We're going to see those 10 kings lined up. Another thing that we need to look for is what's going on in Israel. So Israel will begin to start coming back to God. You'll start seeing Christian people becoming Christ followers in Israel. It's just something that will happen as we get closer to the end times. There are a lot of signs that we will start being able to see as we get closer. So we can look forward to that, but we can't overstate it because we don't know when it's going to happen or what is going to happen. Now let me give you one really cool thing. There is just a little thing that's happening in Israel right now that'll happen as it gets closer to the end times. Supposedly things are going to start living in the Dead Sea. So the Dead Sea nothing can live in the Dead Sea. It's dead. I mean, if you've ever been to it, it's absolutely beautiful and it is deadly. You can't stay in it long, it'll ruin your skin. You could die. It would suck the life out of you. It's so full with salt that things cannot live in the Dead Sea because it truly is dead. But something is happening. Things are starting, there are some places in the Dead Sea where things are starting to come to life. And there are just sections of where the Dead Sea is where things are starting to happen. There's also some things that are happening with people in Israel. Is, you know, they're brilliant people, brilliant. So they're starting to try to do some things to basically put fresh water into the Dead Sea. So they're working on sort of this process even themselves. But things are starting to happen in the Dead Sea. So we know that's just one little tiny sign where that's getting closer to the end of times. So lots of things, and we'll talk more about some different signs that are coming along the way. But hopefully I did not scare you off tonight because it's a lot of stuff and it's really crazy. But what's awesome is that we're going to reign. God's got the power. He will judge, and it's all going to come out in the end in a great way for all of us who believe. So let me wrap it up with a prayer here. Thank you guys so much. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the truth of your word that really is so powerful, and it gives us hope for the future. Lord, help us by faith to trust the fact that you've already had so many things come true. Lord, so many of the prophecies that were already made have happened. And because those things have happened, then we can put our faith in the fact that the other things that are prophesied about that haven't happened yet will come to pass. Lord, thank you for laying it out for us, that making it, just spelling it out for the most part so that we don't really have to wonder we may not know all the details, but we know the basic story, and we also know the end. And so thank you for that, because that is it's a wonderful, happy ending. Lord, we love you and praise you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.